please take a moment right now to hit like, subscribe, and share.
Especially share. That's the big one. When I was 5 or 6, my parents started exposing me to the classics. I'd already seen Star Wars, but now I was being exposed to films like Lord of the Rings, True Grit, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and a fantastic World War II film called The Great Escape. Something about that movie in particular really flicked a switch inside of me. The coolness of the characters, especially Steve McQueen's Hilts and James Garner's Handley, the resourcefulness and skill of Sedgwick and Blythe, the ingeniousness of Big X and Ashley Pitt and Griffith. This film kind of had everything. And maybe the neatest was, for a movie about World War II, there was very little of the war in it. There are no big battlefield scenes, no sweeping hellscapes of the ultimate inhumanity. Just men in a jail trying to escape, using all the resources at their disposal to fight a war that for them should have been over. I loved it. I instantly loved it. I knew my mom and dad loved it too. This wasn't just a film we would watch, it was one we would talk about how much we liked. And then, one day, when I was almost 8, they took me to the local cinema, Galaxy, to see The Great Escape on the big screen. I've talked about this before, so I won't go over it all again. But man, that was a special moment. Sitting there between my parents in this huge dark room, seeing the Cooler King in larger-than-life scale, it was magnificent. And I will remember it forever. Because, after all, I love old movies.
Hello, film historians. I'm Derek and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 58. And I'm just gonna say it before you do. More like episode 50 great.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
Well, I think in this case, such hyperbole is justified.
Okay, tell him why.
Well, I feel like I've been saying this a lot lately. Like, I'm looking at episodes and going back a few months, and I've really been loving the films we've been doing. Like, everything is a film with a deep personal connection to me. Like, this isn't just I love old movies. This is, I specifically really love these particular movies.
We have been on a bit of a roll with that kind of stuff.
I'll say. And today is no exception, as we are moving into November with a look at the 1963 classic, The Great Escape, directed by John Sturges.
Great film. This is going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Right. So what are we waiting for?
Great point. Check out the episode description to see how you can find us on social media and at Pet Rock Radio.
Get in touch with us. We love reading your comments, replying to emails, and if you would like to read a cold open for us, we want to make that happen.
Totally. So, are you all set to head off to Stalag Luft 3 where all the rotten eggs are in one basket?
I got my dispersal pants on and everything. Hit the music.
John Sturges is an interesting director to consider. Most of his career was spent making B films, but he turned in some of the most memorable films of all time when he made it bigger. And yet quality was never a guarantee from him, as he was always as likely to turn in a disappointing film as a successful one. He favored narratives that saw tough and resourceful men struggling with difficult, almost impossible challenges, but he had no real stylistic flair or particular visual style. He handled ensemble casts extremely well, but he never really handled female characters effectively. Sometimes he wouldn't even have them in his films at all. After attending college on a football scholarship, Sturges served in the Second World War, mostly making training films for the Air Force. After the war ended, he had an apprenticeship at RKO, and then was signed by Columbia, where he began making cheap films, mostly westerns, known as 12-Day Wonders. This was due to their production schedule being a trim 12 days. A move to MGM saw him make films with larger budgets, but ones that were still clearly in B-film territory. Now, he made some notable films in the 1950s, like Bad Day at Black Rock, certainly being the most renowned. But Gunfight at the OK Corral and The Old Man and the Sea were also with their merits. In the 1960s, he began making films for United Artists, and that's when he made what are perhaps the two most important and memorable films of his career, The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape. Both were packed with ensemble casts of up-and-coming stars, teaming with some well-established talent, and led to final products that were perfect examples of Sturgis's style. Entertaining, rugged, and with downbeat endings that left the audience in doubt as to whether in fact the good guys did win. Sturgis actually met Akira Kurosawa, the director of the legendary film The Seven Samurai, upon which The Magnificent Seven is based. Kurosawa lavished praise on Sturgis's version of the story, and Sturgis would recall that as the proudest moment of his career. The rest of the 1960s were spent making unremarkable films that struggled to find audiences, like Ice Station Zebra and Marooned. But he re-teamed with Steve McQueen in the 1970s to make Le Mans, although he did not finish that film. And he teamed up again with Charles Bronson on Chino. His final film, the World War II ensemble caper film The Eagle Has Landed, again featured a strong cast, up against impossible odds, but this time the story was told from the German point of view. Winner of the Golden Boot Award for his contributions to the Western genre and cinema, John Sturgis died in 1992 at the age of 82.
Born in Australia and later serving in World War II, James Clavell first entered the British film industry in the early 1950s. He initially tried to work as a producer, but he didn't have much luck getting work, so he began writing screenplays. In 1954, Clavell moved to Hollywood, and 2 years later, he sold a script called Far Alert to RKO. The script was then sold and bought numerous times, until it eventually sparked the interest of producer Robert L. Lippert, who then hired Clavell to write the screenplay for The Fly in 1958. This really was the launching point for Clavell, and he was hired to write several scripts over the next few years, such as Watusi in 1959, Five Gates of Hell 1959, and Walk Like a Dragon in 1960. In the 1960s, Clavell wrote scripts for films such as The Great Escape in 1963 and 633 Squadron in 1964, and he also wrote his first novel, King Rat, in 1962. During the 1970s, he mostly wrote various well-received novels, and Clavell's screenwriting career was all but over, aside from a few television miniseries, including Shogun in 1980 and Noble House in 1988. Ending his career with 22 writing credits, Clavell died in 1994 at the age of 72.
In World War II, Donald Pleasance registered as a conscientious objector and refused conscription by the British Armed Forces, continuing his placement with the Jersey Repertory Company that he had joined at the age of 20 when he decided to become a professional actor. However, 1940 saw the Luftwaffe attacks arrive on London, and Donald joined the Royal Air Force and served as an aircraft wireless operator, flying in almost 60 raids over Europe, until 1944 when his plane was shot down, and Donald became a prisoner of war for the Germans. He entertained his fellow captives by producing and acting in many plays during his prisoner's stint. After the war, he returned to acting, earning many accolades for his craft. His first love, the stage, remained with him throughout the majority of his life as he continued his involvement in stage productions, even while he appeared in both television and in film. Pleasance hit the small screen first, appearing in multiple television episodes in Britain and making his American television debut in 1962 in an episode of Twilight Zone. You could also find him in shows such as Danger Man, The Outer Limits, The Fugitive, and Columbo, to name just a few. And he continued appearances on TV until the late 1980s. He even scored a hosting gig on Saturday Night Live. This was the 1981 Halloween episode. The big screen called to Pleasance in 1954, and he made his film debut with a film called The Beachcomber, followed by movie after movie with such illustrious fellows as Richard Burton, Alec Guinness, Robert Duvall, and he was even in George Lucas's directorial debut, THX 1138. Pleasance was singled out by critics for his moving portrayal of the film's most touching character in 1963's The Great Escape. And Pleasance was also the actor who portrayed the James Bond villain Blofeld in 1967's You Only Live Twice, and this was the first time Blofeld's face had actually been seen on camera. 1978 saw Pleasance portray the iconic Dr. Loomis in Halloween, a role he would reprise several more times in Halloween 2, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Pleasance also branched out to record several children's stories as spoken records, and he lent himself to voiceovers, including the British public information film that warned children of the dangers of playing near water, inadvertently gaining notoriety for allegedly giving children nightmares. He also wrote a children's book in 1977, which was adapted into a children's recording with the title character, Scouse the Mouse, being voiced by Ringo Starr. All told, Donald Pleasance racked up 241 television and film credits, and as the story goes, he was never able to turn down any role he was offered. He was also appointed an officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for his services to the acting profession in 1994 by Queen Elizabeth II. Donald Pleasance died in 1995 at the age of 75.
Born in 1917 in Scotland, James Donald intended on becoming a teacher, at least until he saw the late Christopher Bean, and changed course, seeing as many shows as he possibly could, as well as studying at the London Theatre Studio for 2 years. 1938 saw James make his stage debut in The White Guard. He appeared on stage regularly and even had a role in Twelfth Night with Michael Redgrave. When the war hit, James attempted to enlist, but was declared medically unfit, so he joined ENSA, the group responsible for entertaining the British Armed Forces during the war, making several war films. Once the war ended, James could be found back on stage while simultaneously appearing in film projects, but it wouldn't be until 1954 that James made his Hollywood film debut in Beau Brummel. James became a much in-demand actor to play supporting roles in action and prisoner of war films, including 1957's Bridge on the River Kwai and, of course, 1963's The Great Escape. Alongside his continued stage and film work, James began appearing on the small screen in 1960, appearing in television programs in both America and England, including Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Unfortunately, by 1978, James's lifelong battle with asthma forced him into retiring, where he grew grapes and made wine on his farm, until 1993, when he passed away from stomach cancer. He was 76. Okay, so me. I want to do this part.
But usually
Me!
Well, sure, but...
Nope, this is prime Steve McQueen, and he's my favorite, so I'm gonna do this.
Should we have covered Steve McQueen in the bios?
No, let's wait until we do the Blob for that.
Are we doing the Blob?
Are we doing the Blob? Come on.
All right, take it away.
Great. So, based on the nonfiction 1950 book of the same name, written by Paul Brickhill, that John Sturges had been shopping around for 8 years, The Great Escape was an attempt to fictionalize and retell an incredible tale from the Second World War.
So The Great Escape was actually a thing?
It was absolutely a thing. In fact, it involved the work of 600 men from several countries coordinating their efforts for over a year. It did lead to the Gestapo taking over Stalag Luft 3, which was in Poland, and doubling the resources to keep it secure.
Which was exactly what the prisoners set out to do.
Now, one of the things that made this film so great was that many of the characters were based fairly closely on real-life equivalents. Roger Bartlett was based on Roger Bushell, who was the mastermind of The Great Escape. S.B.O. Ramsey was based on Herbert Massey, who also walked with a pronounced limp. MacDonald was based on George Harsh, and we'll get into his incredible story in a moment. Plus, many of the actors had real-life combat experience in World War II, like Donald Pleasance, Charles Bronson, or Hans Messemer, who served in the German army and was placed in a Russian POW camp that he escaped from.
And Bronson, who had formerly worked in coal mines before becoming an actor, legitimately was claustrophobic. And he was based on a Canadian claustrophobic coal miner, Wally Fletty.
Take the claustrophobic guy and have him shoot scenes in narrow tunnels where he gets buried alive. Nice.
Hey, that's how you get the authenticity.
The film was shot in the Bavaria section of Germany near Munich. A large POW camp was built, which was a bit stressful for some of the locals until they learned it was a film set, and sound stages were used for interior scenes. And with so many actors and consultants ensuring that the camp was authentic looking, the hope was that the realism factor would be enhanced.
But aside from the elaborate set construction and the subsequent retreeing of the bulldozed land, the actual filming was a bit unremarkable. Fair to say?
Oh, sure. But behind the scenes, there was a lot going on. And as common with productions he was involved in, there was definitely some drama around Steve McQueen.
Okay, let me guess. He pissed off his co-stars?
Oh yeah. Richard Attenborough and he did not get along at all.
Didn't mingle with the cast and crew?
Nope. Kept to himself in a rented chalet.
Was very vocal about getting his own way during scene filming.
Sturgis was definitely a guy McQueen could push around.
Insisted on doing his own stunts?
Oh yeah. In fact, there wasn't even going to be a motorcycle chase in the film, but McQueen had it put in as part of his contract. In fact, not only does he race around the countryside as Hiltz, but also as one of the German motorcycle soldiers in pursuit.
Let's get to the real fun, though. Did he make the jump?
So, I have read conflicting reports. One thing that seems agreed upon is that it's stuntman Bud Eakins who made the jump we see on film. But McQueen and at least one other rider attempted the jump, and these attempts were filmed. Some writers suggest that it's possible McQueen's attempt is in fact what we see in the film. Others say McQueen wiped out on the landing, and others say insurance didn't allow him to attempt the jump at all.
And what do you think happened?
All three. Insurance said no, but he tried anyway and fell. Then Eakins made the jump. That's the simplest version of the story.
Okay. And what was the bit about him almost getting written out of the movie?
Okay. So McQueen was very concerned about a 30-minute section in the middle of the film where his character didn't appear. He was also worried that his character, as obviously the hero of the film...
Oh, obviously.
...wasn't doing enough overtly heroic things. But at the same time, he didn't want to perform any heroics that would be at odds with the cool, detached vibe that Hiltz gave off.
Oh, God. He could be a headache.
Totally. Enough so, in fact, that Sturgis decided that the best plan was to just remove Hiltz from the film altogether. There was no time, due to production delays, to go into the sort of rewrites that McQueen wanted.
But
the studio did not agree with Sturgis on this. Their counter-argument was that the success of the film relied heavily upon the talents and growing box office appeal of Steve McQueen. So the studio paid for another writer to come in specifically to work on McQueen's concerns and make sure that Hiltz came off the way McQueen wanted him to.
Diva.
Yeah, but he was right. One of the things that is undeniable is The Great Escape is the film that really rocketed McQueen up to the Hollywood food chain. He was a big star as a result of the film. His presence predicted box office success, and he would now command top dollar for his fees.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, obviously, we could do episode after episode of the individuals involved in the actual Great Escape. One thing the film doesn't do a great job of is really letting us into the lives of these men. And aside from some surface characteristics, they aren't really portrayed with the greatest accuracy.
Well, that's fair. But some of these men, after all, had lives so incredible, they should almost be the subject of their own films.
Let's hear it. I know you want to talk about George Harsh.
So, Harsh was an American, and as an 18-year-old university student in pre-med from a good family...
So, basically you.
He shot and killed a store clerk.
Yeah.
Just like that, he was a murderer. And he dodged the death sentence, but wound up killing another inmate in a stabbing.
Holy cripes.
He was in jail for 12 years, then was released.
He was a double murderer? How did he possibly get released?
He saved someone's life. Another prisoner required an emergency appendectomy, which Harsh performed using his old, barely there medical training. He saved that guy's life, and as a reward, he was pardoned. He moved to Canada and joined the RCAF, serving as a tail gunner on a Halifax bomber.
Wow. He wanted redemption.
And how? Well, he got shot down and taken to a POW camp where he met Wally Floody, the real-life Canadian tunnel king that Danny is based on. So, as the construction of the tunnels began, Floody wanted Harsh to be in charge of security.
The murderous criminal?
The only guy that had real-life experience being in jail and doing sneaky things behind the backs of guards.
Oh, that's genius.
Both men became fast friends and survived the war. But the transition from post-war life was endlessly hard for Harsh. Depression and other issues.
Now, did they wind up going out the tunnel?
They did not. They and a number of American officers were moved out of the camp before the escape occurred. And then when the war ended, the two relied on each other to survive as they were released from their new camp and had to flee in the face of the advancing Soviet army. They trekked for hundreds of miles, willing on each other. Harsh wrote a book about it called Lonesome Road.
And they remained friends forevermore, right?
They did. Harsh eventually moved to Toronto and became an unofficial member of the Floody family. He was a godfather to Floody's son and lived with them after surviving a suicide attempt.
I feel like one aspect of this film is you can't really discuss it from a historical perspective without considering the real event and the real people. There's so many stories there. And just like in the film, 76 escaped, 3 got away, 50 were killed. And every one of those people had a story.
We could never do this film full justice.
Probably not. But back to business for a bit. Was this film a hit?
Let's measure it in dollars and cents.
That is a fair metric.
Not only was it one of the top-grossing films of its year of release,
which was a stacked year in film, with movies like Cleopatra and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World coming out.
But it basically made back 3 times its budget at the box office.
And these were the days of very low ticket prices, so that is an astounding return. Sadly, when films make that kind of bank these days, there's always talk of a sequel. But can you imagine The Great Escape 2?
I don't even want to imagine a world where that might exist.
Oh, well, what about a remake with Denzel Washington as Big X and Chris Pratt as Hiltz?
No! Stop it! Oh, wait. They did that, didn't they? With Magnificent Seven?
They sure did.
Awful to think about. Star-Lord is no Steve McQueen.
You are. Well, what's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
Okay, so we have an 8.2 on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
The audience score is 95% on Rotten Tomatoes.
There we go.
And the tomato meter is 94%.
Yeah.
The film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Editing. And the film can be watched on Amazon Prime Video under the MGM and Hollywood Suite subscriptions.
Fed up with the expenses in manpower and resources expended capturing escaped POWs, the Nazi government creates Stalag Luft III, an escape-proof camp, and they fill it with the most escape-minded prisoners in Germany. The base commander, Colonel von Luger, is not especially sympathetic to the Nazi cause, and he tries to run the camp in a gentlemanly, respectful, but firm way.
The prisoners are led by Group Captain Ramsey, the senior officer. And soon by the most notorious escape artist, Roger Bartlett. Bartlett relaunches his X organization and announces a plan to have 250 men escape all at once out 3 tunnels called Tom, Dick, and Harry.
The jobs involved in carrying out such a feat are many, and it's through this delineation of task that we meet the various prisoners and learn of their specialties. Hendley is the scrounger, Sedgwick, the manufacturer, Danny and Willie are in charge of digging, MacDonald handles intelligence, Ashley Pitt is in charge of disposing of the dirt excavated from the tunnels. Griffith is the tailor who will make civilian clothes and uniforms for everyone. And the unlikeliest of all, Blythe, a birdwatcher and pacifist, is the forger.
Also in the mix is an American pilot, Virgil Hiltz. He isn't a part of the X organization and prefers attempting to escape on his own, which leads to him constantly being caught and placed in a cement cell known as the cooler. On one of the nights where he is free in the camp, Big X asks Hiltz to escape, survey the surrounding countryside, and get recaptured so he can share the information he gains. He declines the request.
As a fun side project, Hendley, Hiltz, and Goff construct a still and make some good old-fashioned American moonshine. But while the prisoners have an impromptu 4th of July party, one of the guards discovers the Tom Tunnel. Filled with despair that all hope for escape is lost, Ives tries to escape over the fence and is gunned down. And furious, Hiltz agrees to the recon job offered to him before, and in exchange, he is given a priority position in the tunnel on escape night.
All efforts now go into digging the hairy tunnel, but Danny's claustrophobia and a shortage of wood to shore up the tunnel cause many delays. And Blythe's vision deteriorates significantly, making it hard, but still possible, for him to work on the forged papers. His near blindness makes him a huge liability in the escape attempt, but Hendley takes Blythe under his wing and says he will get him out.
And after almost 2 years of preparation, Harry is ready to evacuate the prisoners. Well, almost. On the night of the escape, they learn the tunnel is 20 feet short, and that means, rather than opening up in the tree line, the mouth is in an open area that is patrolled by sentries and spotlights.
An air raid blackout helps them get men out quickly, and a signal system is set up with a rope. But Griffith is impatient and doesn't wait for the signal, exiting the tunnel right in view of a guard. This ends the escape and locks things down, but the next morning the remaining prisoners learn that 76 POWs have made it out. Many of them missed their train, so are stuck in a large group at the station.
Some of the escapees improvise. Cavendish tries hitchhiking, but he is delivered directly to the Germans. Sedgwick steals a bike and pedals for it. Danny and Willie find a rowboat and go by river until they can climb aboard a ship from Sweden in a nearby harbor.
The most exciting escapes come from Hendley and Blythe, who steal a small aircraft and try to make for Switzerland. And Hiltz, who steals a motorcycle and is chased by a huge number of soldiers across country. Hendley's plane develops engine problems, and they endure a forced landing, with Blythe being shot by soldiers as they are captured.
Hiltz attempts to jump over the large barbed wire fence at the border, but his tires are shot out and he careens into the wire, trapped like a fly in a web for the Germans to apprehend him. Meanwhile, Ashley Pitt kills a troublesome Gestapo officer, hoping to help Big X get away, but he sacrifices his own life in the process. MacDonald and Big X are soon captured regardless, giving themselves away by speaking English.
With everyone now captured, 48 of the men are transported together to a field where they are machine-gunned to death. We see Sedgwick get away, making it to France, and then to Spain.
That is a heck of a bike ride.
Hendley, Hiltz, and a few others are returned to camp, left to wonder if their efforts were worth the cost in life. Von Luger is replaced by a new commandant, and he mentions to Hiltz that the American will likely see Berlin before he does. Hiltz is put in the cooler, where he spent so much of the film.
The end.
Is it bad that I want to be in The Great Escape?
You would never make it through the tunnel, kid.
It's true.
So, pros and cons?
Say the thing.
Okay. As always, we don't actually rate films here on the show. We don't have stars, we don't have thumbs. We just tell you some things we liked.
Some things we didn't.
And then we recommend whether or not you might enjoy giving this one a watch.
Take it away.
My pros. Number 1, the cast and the characters they play. This film is the very definition of a star-studded production. While not everyone in the cast was as big then as they would eventually become, it's incredible what a prescient home run their casting department hit this time around. Steve McQueen, James Garner, James Coburn, Charles Bronson, Donald Pleasance, Richard Attenborough, Hans Messmer, David McCullum. It just goes on and on and on. Wow. Number 2, the music. That incredible Elmer Bernstein score. That amazing theme. I tell you what, on YouTube, right now, go check out the channel of the Film Symphony Orchestra and watch their version of the Great Escape theme. And you tell me if Bernstein wasn't one of the all-time greats at scoring films. The music thrills when it needs to, it celebrates when it gets the opportunity, and it punctuates the emotional moments without ever seeming cheesy or maudlin. Number 3, this film has the perfect transition between planning a caper and the aftermath of carrying it out. Caper films are a lot of fun. Seeing the planning and preparation process for an operation of significant scale is really cool to watch, and this film does a great job of getting that across. Both major and minor characters get wonderful little moments to shine, and the viewer is completely placed inside the world of the film. It's not always clear exactly how much time has passed, but that's not a problem, since what we are watching is so much fun. There are movies that show that war is hell, and there are movies that present war as being kind of fun. and this one definitely falls more into the latter grouping. And as escapism, that's okay. My cons: the Americanization of the story. The Great Escape is a film based on a book that recounts an actual event, but it's fair to say that the film we got and the event that inspired it have some gaps between them. And while some narrative changes were included to make the story better, more filmable, more watchable, some were specifically made to make the film more appealing to American audiences. So not just the casting of American actors, but also using the American characters as important catalysts for the escape, critical members of the X organization, and just really as the stars of the film. Even characters that weren't American, like Danny, who was Polish, or Sedgwick, the Australian, they were played by American actors. Canadian POWs were a significant part of the actual Great Escape, and as a film enthusiast, a history buff, and a Canadian, I would have loved to have seen the contributions of my countrymen portrayed a bit more accurately. Number 2, the lack of female characters. To put it gently, this film is what you would call a sausage fest. From top to bottom, it's manly men doing manly things. And while it might be historically accurate that none of these POWs had seen a woman for a long time, it's surprising that none of them even talk about one. Does no one have a wife, or a girlfriend, or a sister, or a mother back home that they long to see? Their motivations are all as soldiers: screw up the enemy. And despite one line about some of them having their own ideas about what to do when they escape, the very human reaction of missing loved ones, thinking about them, talking about them, looking at pictures of them, receiving mail from them, none of that is here. It's all duty, all honor, all escape, all the time. The sense of despair these men must have felt is summed up in Ives, but it just doesn't ring true. The lack of female characters, even as motivators for the prisoners, is glaring. Studio execs knew this, and they petitioned Sturges to include some women, at least as featured extras. Sturges flatly refused. And that's all I have. Usually, I don't have a problem coming up with 3 cons, and in this case, I certainly could if I got nitpicky. But I'm not going to do that. This is overall an extremely enjoyable film about incredibly driven, intelligent, and resourceful people. This isn't Ocean's 11, where you have a bunch of lovable, charming criminals robbing reprehensible criminals. This is prisoners of war, in terrible conditions, overcoming their hardship with ingenuity and hard work, and continuing to fight the war on their own terms. It's an interesting counterpoint of a film to Bridge on the River Kwai, where we see prisoners broken down by the hopelessness and haplessness of their plight and arguably becoming collaborators with the enemy. In The Great Escape, the war doesn't end for these men just because they're captured. It just changes the field of battle and the terms of engagement. It might also be the best war film ever not to have a single battle scene in it. This movie is a legitimate classic. It's endlessly rewatchable. See it if you haven't. Watch it for the umpteenth time if you have. It's that great, and it gets a full watch recommendation from me. You're up.
Okay. So my pros. 1. The music. Honestly, for me, the music or score in a lot of films isn't something I really notice. It's typically just something I forget about and don't really acknowledge. But this is not one of those films. The score in this, specifically the theme, is so strong and upbeat, I just feel happy listening to it. And it's so memorable. Anytime I hear something that sounds remotely similar, I stop and go, hey, that's like The Great Escape. It's such an essential part of the film. I don't think I can imagine there being any other piece of music in the background of this film. 2. The pacing. It was done very well in the film. The first third might seem slow in some parts, but there's so much going on with all the different characters. It really needs that time to breathe. It is a bit slower, but that lets us really get to know and like and support the characters while watching the extensive planning that goes into the escape. The escape itself is pretty slow and drawn out, but that just makes it so much more intense. I feel like I hold my breath through the entire thing. I get so nervous and just wait for something bad to happen. Following that, you have all the fast-paced chase scenes to the end of the film. The pacing is done perfectly to really keep you on the edge of your seat while watching the movie. 3. Steve McQueen. I love him. There, I've said it. I love this guy so much. Always have, always will. Yeah, I've heard the stories about how difficult and obnoxious he was to deal with. But honestly, I don't care. He just has this presence on screen that draws you in and makes you want to watch him. Anytime he walked into a scene, I immediately focused on him instead of the others. I think he is super awesome, and I love everything I've ever seen him in. Now my cons. 1. The length. So, earlier I talked about the pacing and how much I like it. That still stands, of course, and part of the reason I liked it so much was because it makes you forget about the runtime. The film is almost 3 hours long. It's really easy to get so invested in the movie that it feels like you blink and it's over. But sometimes it can be a bit much to get into a film that long. For me, no matter how invested I am, after a certain point, it can get a bit difficult to stay invested and keep paying attention to what's going on. Plus, sometimes it can be sort of challenging to find and set aside at least 3 hours just to watch a movie. I might have appreciated it if the film was a bit shorter, but honestly, I'm not sure if I would want anything about the movie to change. And unfortunately, that's it. I honestly just can't bring myself to say too many negative things about this movie. It holds too special a place in my heart, and I genuinely enjoy it too much. It's just such a wonderful film. Stacked cast with incredible actors, beautifully shot, expertly written. It has everything. This film is actually an extremely close second place for my favorite movie of all time. So obviously, I could spend forever gushing about it and telling you how amazing it is. So yes, of course I'm going to say go watch it. And if you haven't already, you're seriously missing out. This one should be immediately bumped to the top of your watch list, regardless of whether you've seen it before or not. Go watch it right now.
Well, there we have it. And really, there's no surprise with the outcome. We probably could have just said double watch recommendation back in the intro.
Yeah, but in all fairness, this is just a truly great film.
Yep.
Awesome war movie, awesome caper movie, awesome star-studded mega film.
It's one of those sort of generational films for me. I remember watching it with my dad, and my enthusiasm for it growing out of his love for the film, and then when you were old enough, your mom and I watching it with you.
I loved the time we saw it on the big screen at Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember that. What an experience.
You know, everyone should be so lucky to see their favorite films on a big screen at least once.
That should be in the Constitution.
Yes, it should. Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks as we look at another huge, star-studded World War II film from the 1960s.
I want to say it. Let me say it. Me.
Go ahead.
We will be taking a look at my other favorite war film, also a caper film, The Dirty Dozen, starring Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson, among others.
So many others. John Cassavetes, Telly Savalas, Richard Jackal. Oh, man.
It's amazing. I can't wait. But until then, be sure to watch more movies.
And remember, tell people about us. After all, we're not a secret, and you don't have to keep us all to yourselves.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like getting to harass, confound, and confuse the enemy as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sound the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Additional research for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, is done by Nikki Weatherden. Audio clips come from freefx.co.uk. Images are used through the provisions of fair use, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, is by The Crocs.